So my name's Bronwyn Buntine. I'm the Sustainable Drainage Team Leader at Kent County Council. And as both Tudor and Simon have said, we were sort of one of the stakeholders involved with the Learning and Action Alliance. It's a bit difficult. I didn't have engagement through all the workshops, so I've also asked colleagues about outcomes towards the end. And this sort of reflects some of the comments that both Tudor and Simon have alluded to in relation to the capacity of stakeholders who might be involved in an LAA. So I'm going to cover the context, where KCC fits with Ebbsfleet, what our interests in the LAA were, process and how we saw it as, I guess, a stakeholder being involved in what Ebbsfleet were doing, the benefits and challenges that we see from our perspective, the learning outcomes that we've got and how that fits with Kent's priorities. So Kent's the lead local flood authority for Kent. That means we have a statutory consultation duty within planning. We also have other, flood risk management authority duties as well. Ebbsfleet is only one of a number of local planning authorities for whom we provide statutory consultation. We have 12 LPAs, we respond to KCC planning, and Ebbsfleet, which sits as this formed development corporation between Dartford and Gravesham. So it's in that little red circle. So just to give it some weight in relation to how it fits within all of the consultations we see across Kent itself, because there were historically approved applications, the majority of consultations we see from EDC are in relation to reserved matters and discharge of conditions. And historically, the numbers on an annual basis aren't huge, but they do often represent a large number of dwelling units. So aside from that actual just planning review of the plans which come in, we're also very supportive of the aspirations that EDC have in relation to the Garden City and their approach for sustainability and water management. So our actual interest in the Learning Action Alliance is that it's not just sustainable drainage that sits within the flood and water management team, but we also have colleagues who are engaged or involved with water resources and wastewater management planning. So they have very good knowledge of issues in relation to water supply and demand and how planning is happening for wastewater treatment. We also have a team of biodiversity officers who also sit within our sort of more local teams, and that interrelationship of people is what we could bring to the table, because it assisted, I think, in building on the linkages between the different technical areas. Often in our day-to-day jobs, we focus on the delivery of whether we're looking at SUDS or biodiversity, but in being in a Learning and Action Alliance, you're actually looking at the relationships between what you do. And the flowcharts which Tudor showed of our early workshops really highlighted and made us think about the benefits that we've got between our areas of specialty. So as I said, our main role was providing technical input, or that expertise, but our priority, really what we were looking to get out of this was one, a way of supporting Ebbsfleet in their aspirations, because as local planning authority, they're the main vehicle for delivering better blue-green infrastructure and open space planning and the actual planning aspects of water within the environment. But it was also to look at what sort of strategic policy changes could be implemented, and that was probably the key opportunity that we could see, is that having a wider perspective on all of these matters together and then assessing what's the best way to move policy forward would sort of advance what we want to do within Kent. So the process, both Tudor and Simon have said that it was, it's been going over 3 years. We probably had our first engagement, I've written it down as September 2017. It might have been a little bit before that. But it was an initial workshop which had an extremely large number of different attendees, and they were quite varied in where they were coming from. And I think that actually was, for me, incredibly surprising because I hadn't appreciated, I guess, the approach to LLA. I had no experience of it. So that's also a bit of a problem because you come to this workshop and you don't actually know what you're doing or where you're going, or you don't sort of the overall pathway of where you're going to is not clear because you've not done this before. So you have this degree of confusion. But you're introduced to the process, you do a lot of brainstorming, and it's incredibly, I can say, exhilarating, or makes you, I guess, better appreciate what you do. It does, as you say, this consensus building and learning, and it's a very good experience to be involved in. And so as it proceeds, we probably had 5 or 6 of the LLA actual stakeholder workshops, and the ones in the middle, you developed better understanding of where you were going to within the process and what the outcomes were likely to be. You learnt about system dynamic modelling and process mapping, and so you essentially then reached a thinking and application. It was much more you're providing the information in, and the academics are assessing it and analysing it and moving it around to see how it would make sense. So then you finally get to this final assessment where they've had a final workshop with some of the outputs, and that's where the light bulb moment goes on. And it's like, actually now if we were to enter into another stakeholder LA like this, I think Kent would be better prepared to understand what the commitments required and how it should be prioritised within our general work programs. I think it does suffer a lot from changing people, but it's been a good experience for us. And I think that, again, I think doing it again now, the confusion process at the beginning would be reduced. So what are the key benefits for us in being part of the Learning Action Alliance for EDC? Particularly, we gained new knowledge and applications. The research work that the academic consortium had done isn't normally accessed by us. We do our day-to-day jobs. You have a certain amount of knowledge in relation to your own technical area of expertise, but understanding a little bit more about process mapping and the way they were doing SDMs, it makes you understand the interrelationships between different areas. So it really brings intellectual power for you looking at the problem you have, and we need to access that within the work that we're doing if we're going to improve how we're looking at it, whether it's water management or blue-green infrastructure or biodiversity. We need to bring that academic learning into our everyday work. The second key thing I thought was really important was that this networking across interests. I think it provided greater opportunity for collaboration and understanding different viewpoints of the different and varied stakeholders, because you don't always have opportunities to talk to, other colleagues who might be doing not necessarily a similar role, but have a crossover interest. So, for example, we had one workshop, Southeast River Trust were there, gave us an opportunity to talk about other matters as well as not just EDC matters, but you're sort of stepping out of your day job and you're looking at your technical area in a little bit of a wider context. And it, again, gives you, I think, opportunities to think about what you're doing on a daily basis. And the third thing, I think, is it's the final outcome of what comes out of as an output, that essentially by putting all this information in and rumbling it around a little bit, you actually get to have a fresh outlook of what you're doing. And it's the analytics that have come with it. And again, that was, resourced from the academic consortium, and it's something that we ourselves couldn't do, but they've been able to, I think, give us a better picture, a strategic picture of a particular issue that we have, and that gives is incredibly valuable for us, certainly as we're looking at our own Kent strategies. But there are particular challenges, and I'm sort of put them in a bit of different order. I think there is a particular issue when you're bringing academia and industry together. And if there is understanding at the beginning, if you've got this fellow who is slightly confused, you need to have trust in these types of forums, and if there is uncertainty about where the process is going and what the outcomes are, there can be a lack of faith in where you're heading. So you need to be careful that the process is clear and how it's going to proceed and what the final outcome is, because you really actually want to be people that are sitting in the middle, that are thinking about things and considering things and putting information in, not wondering about what they're doing. So that, I think, is can be easy. It's a trap you can easily fall into when not everybody is on the same level of understanding of matters, in either technically or what the outcome of the project is. The other one that's been mentioned a couple of times is about time and resourcing, and I appreciate tutors' efforts in trying to schedule all of us, and I'm probably one of the worst people to try and get a time within my day to attend meetings, and we had a number of instances where we had to hand off to other team members. And that is difficult, because in actual fact you do want to have continuity across the different products, because things are developed on that iterative process. So it's beneficial if the person who was there initially is still there at workshop 3. So they need to have this stamina over the length of the program. So this is over 2 years, which sometimes can be hard to accommodate with changing work levels and team members. In saying that, it's also, I think, beneficial to have a wider or a bigger group. So if you were looking at the flood and water management team within Kent, that's, you could have 1 of 9 people, or it might possibly be better to say, we're going to have a roster of 3 people. So I think there might be other ways of managing that, but that notification needs to be understood right at the very beginning of the process. The other thing I think that becomes really important, and this is where I think, tutors saying you've got issues if you've got a lack of commitment on the day, then you don't actually have your people providing your technical input there to have a good workshop. You need to have those stakeholders with the real application and the real understanding of what the issue is, particularly for your locality. So if you're getting academic input from elsewhere, they don't necessarily know the ins and outs of what happens in Kent. So you need the on-the-ground experience and the identification of the priorities at your locality. So you really do need to have that engagement. When the stakeholders are there at the workshops, they're definitely engaged. It's just getting them there, which is the problem. So the third one is, I think, this issue between academic outcomes and authority outcomes, and it's possibly a little bit hard to convey, is that academically they would have research outcomes that the institutions have been looking at, and initially you may not see that SDM or process mapping or whatever it is applicable to your situation. And I think that you've got to be clear in your understanding that what they're doing as a research project is actually fitting the authorities' priorities and needs. And I think in this instance, it has delivered something of great value to EDC. But I could see that if you didn't have a good understanding and fit between your academic partners and your organisations that you're applying to, that there would be this mismatch, and the outcome would not be as good. So what have we learnt from the LA involvement? We've learned about system dynamic models for water balance. And I think ideally it's this, the final information that had been submitted recently demonstrates this strategic assessment over a longer period of time, which is of incredible value for us. You know, Simon, has made comments about the value of rainwater harvesting and, how that could be implemented, whether it's not through regulation, it's through a different type of social behaviour, social modification, that sort of thing. Well, that comes back to what sort of policies also that we may set to support the local planning authority. So it has given us, I think, good input for us to sit back and say, are there other things that we need to do on water resource management? And then it helps us deliver that as a strategic policy. So the other thing that I think I've realised is that there are incredible amounts. I talked about intellectual power. There's a lot out there in our academic institutions that we could use, and they're way beyond our knowledge. It's not something I'm going to apply every day, but I need to be able to access it, and I need to be aware of possibly what they're doing. So I need to use that as a resource. So I think the relationship between academia and what we're delivering on a policy front needs to continue, and I think an Learning Action Alliance actually delivers that, gives you that opportunity to access that information that you're not ever going to pick up as a professional, but is their bread and butter, but will help you develop your policy and improve your situation. So final assessment for us on involvement in the Learning Action Alliance is, I think that initially our actual lack of experience in the process of how this was all going to fall out actually hampered probably full engagement to some degree. I think there is a comment that Tudor made questioning about that initially it might have been too ambitious, and this question of iterative processes. When you're only engaged on a limited number of events and workshops, this comes back to this trust issue and whether you're confused or know where you're going. I think there is something within the process that when you commit to an LLA, you need to understand, again, first what that degree of commitment is, but you also need to understand that there is a certain amount of free-formness, it's flexibility within the way the project may evolve. And that, I think, needs to be clear to the participants early on. Another thing that was quite important for us, I think, if we're to be involved in more of these types of workshops and alliances, is to be clear about who are the stakeholders, particularly from our authority, who we're deputising to attend, and how do we ensure that we've got representation. Because I think making sure that you've got input is very important, because it balances out across all stakeholders. You need everybody to be there. So we would certainly support and commit to another Learning Action Alliance, because we think it does give us this extra input, this extra value that we wouldn't be able to access under our own resourcing. It gives us better networking potential. We have, learning outcomes that we couldn't get elsewhere. We have better connectivity across our different technical specialties. It is incredibly valuable in not necessarily, you can't, I think, write a metric for it, but I think those of us who've had the opportunity to be engaged, involved with it, have come away and we've learned something new. So it's very good sort of for staff, staff learning as well. Okay, that's it.